Imagine a world where the sky is always gray, the air thick with the smell of damp earth, and the only sounds are the creaking of old wooden beams and the distant murmur of a river. This was the world of John Calvin, born in 1509 in a small French town called Noyon. But beneath the dull surface, a fire was stirring, a fire that would change the world. John Calvin was not always a giant. He was a boy, just like you, with dreams and fears. He grew up in a time when the church held immense power, and the world was filled with superstitions and traditions that often seemed more important than the words of the Bible. But Calvin was different. He had a mind that never stopped questioning, and a heart that yearned for truth. When Calvin was a young man, he moved to Paris to study law. But the more he learned, the more he realized that the church was not what it should be. The teachings of the church were often more about power and control than about love and salvation. Calvin began to see that the Bible, the Word of God, was being twisted and hidden from the people. He felt a deep sense of injustice and a burning desire to change things. Calvin's journey was not easy. He faced ridicule, exile, and even the threat of death, but he was determined. He believed that the Word of God should be accessible to everyone, not just the elite. He believed that the church should be a place of true worship, not a tool for the powerful to control the masses. In 1536, Calvin published his most famous work, The Institutes of the Christian Religion. This book was like a torch in the darkness. It challenged the old ways and offered a new vision of the church. It was a call to return to the pure teachings of the Bible, to a God who is both just and merciful. Calvin's ideas spread like wildfire. They reached Geneva, a city that was ripe for change. In Geneva, Calvin found a place where his ideas could take root. He became a leader, a reformer, and a preacher. He worked tirelessly to transform the city into a model of Christian living. He established schools, hospitals, and a system of church governance that emphasized the importance of the Bible and the community. But Calvin's influence extended far beyond Geneva. His ideas spread across Europe and around the world. They inspired other reformers, like John Knox in Scotland and the Puritans in England. They shaped the way people thought about God, the church, and their place in the world. Calvin's legacy is still felt today. His ideas about the sovereignty of God, the importance of the Bible, and the need for a reformed church continue to shape the beliefs and practices of millions of people. His life and work remind us that even in the darkest of times, a single person with a burning desire for truth can make a difference. As you read this book, you will discover more about John Calvin, the man who set the world on fire. You will see how his ideas changed the course of history and continue to inspire people today. You will learn about the challenges he faced and the victories he won. And you will be reminded that no matter how small you may feel, you too can make a difference in the world. John Calvin's ideas didn't just stay in Geneva. They spread all over the world, changing the way people thought and lived. To understand this, we need to look at the big picture, not just a small part of Calvin's life or work. Imagine a world where people couldn't read or write. This was the case for many in Europe before the 14th century. But then, a terrible plague called the Black Death hit, killing so many people that the old way of life with lords and serfs couldn't continue. Towns started to grow, and a new middle class of merchants, traders, and bankers emerged. These people were literate and wanted to read the Bible and understand their faith better. They also wanted to have a say in how their communities were run. This new middle class became the backbone of the Protestant Reformation, especially in places like Geneva. Calvin and his followers believed that understanding the Bible was crucial. They worked hard to translate it into different languages so that everyone could read it. One of Calvin's cousins, Olivetan, published a French translation in 1535. Another follower, Robert Estienne, divided the Bible into chapters and verses, making it easier to read and study. This was a big deal because before that, the Bible was one long text. The Geneva Bible, published in 1560, became very popular in England. It had lots of notes in the margins that explained the text, and it was reprinted 160 times over 50 years. Another important translation was the Diodati Bible, which brought the Bible to Italian Protestants. Reading and preaching the Bible were central to Calvinist life. Churches and families spent time studying the Word, and this focus on education and understanding led to a lot of progress. Calvinists became great preachers and scholars, and their work influenced many areas of life, from politics to business. Calvin wasn't just a theologian. He was also a practical leader. He dealt with real problems in Geneva, from economics to education. One of his key ideas was about how power should be used. He believed that power should come from God, and that people should have a say in how their communities were run. This is why Calvin supported the idea of democracy, where decisions are made by the majority, and everyone has a voice. But what about when rulers were unfair or cruel? Calvin believed that if a ruler ordered people to do something against God's will, it was right to resist. This idea evolved over time, especially in places like Scotland, where John Knox used Calvin's teachings to fight against autocratic rule. The Scots, French, Huguenots, and Dutch Protestants all used these ideas to stand up against tyranny and fight for their rights. Calvin's influence didn't stop with these early movements. It continued to shape the world in many ways, from the development of democratic governments to the promotion of human rights and education. Calvin's ideas about individual responsibility and the importance of the Bible have had a lasting impact, making the world a better place for many people. So, when you think about John Calvin, remember that his ideas weren't just about theology. They were about how to live a good, responsible life and how to make the world a fairer, more just place. His legacy is a testament to the power of faith and the importance of using that faith to serve others. Calvinism, a branch of Protestant Christianity, emerged in the 16th century and quickly became a force for change in Europe. One of the most significant aspects of Calvinism was its emphasis on resistance to tyranny. This idea was rooted in the belief that God did not approve of unjust rulers, and that it was the duty of the faithful to resist such rulers by any means necessary. This concept was revolutionary at the time and laid the groundwork for modern ideas of democracy and human rights. In 1578, a French Protestant work called Bindier contra tyrannos, a defense of the right to resist tyrants, articulated this idea beautifully. It stated that piety, justice, and charity required people to maintain the law and the church, bind the hands of tyrants, and help those who were suffering. This was a powerful message that inspired many to fight against oppression. Calvin himself and the Calvinists who followed him believed that tyranny was not the will of God. They argued that the godly had a duty to resist tyranny, whether through passive means like refusing to obey unjust laws or through active means like rebellion. This idea was especially important for Protestants who lived as minorities in Catholic or Muslim countries. They demanded freedom of conscience and the protection of minority rights, which were essential for their survival. One of the most significant contributions of Calvinism to modern society is the concept of human rights. The idea that individuals have inherent rights that should be protected by law was a direct result of Calvinist thinking. This idea can be traced from the 16th century Calvinists to the modern concepts of democracy, which emphasized the protection of minority rights. Education was another area where Calvinism made a lasting impact. Calvin believed that a literate population was essential for a functioning society. In Geneva, where he led the reform of the church, measures were taken to educate children and care for the poor. The Genevan Academy, founded in 1559, was a center for training ministers and promoting education. This emphasis on education spread to other Reformed communities, leading to the founding of institutions like Princeton University in the United States and the work of John Amos Comenius, a Czech Calvinist who advocated for universal education. The freedom of the press, another cornerstone of democracy, also has roots in Calvinist thought. John Milton, an English poet and statesman, was a strong advocate for press freedom. In his essay Areopagitica, he argued that the free exchange of ideas was essential for learning and progress. This idea was further developed by Lord Reith, the founder of the British Broadcasting Corporation, BBC, who defended the independence of the media against government control. The fight for human rights, justice, and democracy has been a constant theme among Calvinists. During the American Revolution, Irish Presbyterians played a crucial role in the fight against British tyranny. The Declaration of Independence, which laid out the principles of freedom and equality, was signed by several Irish Presbyterians. This document was a powerful statement against tyranny and a clear expression of Calvinist ideals. In the 20th century, Calvinists continued to stand up against injustice. Marc Baudner, the president of the French Reformed Church, bravely denounced the treatment of Jews and political prisoners by the Nazi puppet government in France. Willem Wizard Hooft, a Dutch Protestant, was active in the resistance against the Nazi occupation of Holland. These individuals risked their lives to defend the principles of freedom and human dignity. The idea of individual responsibility, a core Calvinist teaching, has led many to promote and defend human rights. In the 18th century, Thomas McCabe, an Irish Presbyterian, prevented the establishment of a slave trade company in Belfast. David Livingstone, a Scottish explorer and missionary, was a well-known opponent of the slave trade. In the United States, Horace Greeley, a Presbyterian, fought against the fugitive slave law and other social injustices. The humanitarian efforts of Calvinists have also been significant. Henry Dunant, a Swiss Calvinist, founded the International Red Cross, an organization dedicated to providing aid to those in need without discrimination. Woodrow Wilson, another Presbyterian, was instrumental in setting up the League of Nations, which aimed to prevent future wars. These organizations have had a lasting impact on the world, promoting peace and justice. Calvinism has also influenced the fields of science and economics. The Genevan Academy had a library that included modern works on astronomy, a field that was often suppressed by the Catholic Church. Calvin's attitude toward lending money for interest, which was considered usury by the Catholic Church, was more lenient. This openness to financial practices helped the Protestant community, particularly the Calvinists, to thrive in the early modern period and played a role in the development of modern capitalism. In summary, Calvinism has been a driving force for freedom, justice, and human rights. From the 16th century to the present day, Calvinists have fought against tyranny, promoted education, defended the freedom of the press, and worked to create a more just and democratic world. Their legacy continues to shape modern society, reminding us of the importance of standing up for what is right and just. The story of the Genevan bankers is a fascinating chapter in the history of the Reformation. During the Renaissance, Italian city-states like Florence, Venice, and Lucca were the financial powerhouses of Europe. Lucca, in particular, was known for its banking families who were deeply involved in the Catholic Church. However, a significant event changed the course of Lucca's history when its bishop, Peter Martyr Vermigli, converted to Protestantism. This conversion had a ripple effect, and many of the leading banking families in Lucca followed suit. These families didn't just change their religious beliefs, they also decided to move to Geneva, a city that was becoming a center of Protestant thought and activity. By bringing their banking expertise to Geneva, they laid the foundation for the city's reputation as a financial hub. Over time, these families produced many noted theologians and continued to influence the development of Protestantism. For example, the Turretini, Diodati Miceli, Berlamacci, and Calandrini families became prominent in Geneva, and they were later joined by other Italian Protestants like the Fatio and Lombard families. French Huguenot bankers also joined them in 1685, when King Louis XIV revoked the Edict of Nantes, forcing many French Protestants to flee to safer grounds. One of the reasons Genevan bankers were so successful was their reputation for honesty. In a world where financial scandals are not uncommon, it's worth remembering the Calvinist virtues of thrift, integrity, and hard work. These values were not just talk. They were lived out in the daily practices of these bankers. One notable example is Andrew W. Mellon, a prominent American banker and industrialist. Mellon was the Secretary of the Treasury of the United States and the founder of Gulf Oil and ALCOA. He was known for his philanthropy, donating vast sums of money to charity and his art collection to the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. But the story of Calvinism isn't just about men. Protestant women have also played crucial roles in the movement. One such woman is Princess Emilie of Nassau, the daughter of William the Silent, a key figure in the Dutch revolt against Spain. Despite her royal status, Emily refused to renounce her Protestant faith and went into exile in Geneva. Her courage and commitment to her beliefs are a testament to the strength of her faith. Another inspiring figure is Marie Durand, a French Protestant. At the age of 15, she was arrested for her faith and imprisoned in the Tower of Constance in southern France. For 37 years, she refused to renounce her beliefs, even though she could have been released if she had simply said the word abjure. Instead, she carved the word resistor into the stone of her prison, a powerful symbol of resistance and faith. The influence of Calvinism extends beyond theology and religious institution. It has transformed the lives of millions of people, shaping their behavior and values. The history of Calvinism is a people's history, a story of how faith can lead to significant changes in the world. From the establishment of ecclesiastical discipline in Geneva to the spread of Protestant values across Europe and America, the legacy of John Calvin and his followers is vast and far-reaching. In Geneva, the consistory, a court established by Calvin, played a crucial role in maintaining discipline and promoting reformed practices. The consistory's activities were wide-ranging, from ensuring that people prayed correctly to resolving disputes and promoting moral behavior. For example, the consistory often summoned people to learn how to pray in their native language and to understand the meaning of their prayers. They also worked to eliminate Catholic practices such as attending Mass and to foster a Protestant way of life. The consistory's efforts were not always easy. Many people resisted the changes, especially those who were used to the Catholic traditions. But over time, the consistory's influence helped to shape the community in Geneva, making it a model of Reformed Christianity. This legacy continues to inspire people today, reminding us of the power of faith and the importance of living with integrity and purpose. John Calvin, the man who shaped much of the Protestant faith, was not just a theologian but also a skilled lawyer. His legal education in Bourges and Orleans gave him a unique perspective on how to reform the church and state in Geneva. Calvin's first major work, The Institutes of the Christian Religion, published in 1536, was inspired by the legal text, The Institutes of Justinian, which was a standard introduction to law. When Calvin arrived in Geneva, he quickly realized that the city needed more than just spiritual reform. He saw the need for a well-structured legal system that could support the new religious order. One of his first acts was to help draft the 1541 Ecclesiastical Ordinances, which set out the rules for the church and its relationship with the state. This was followed by the 1542 Edict of the Lieutenant and the 1543 Ordinances on Offices and Officers, which further defined the roles and responsibilities of church and state officials. Calvin didn't stop there. He continued to work on new laws, creating more than 100 new ordinances that covered a wide range of topics, from marriage and education to social welfare and public morality. He even left behind outlines for comprehensive civil and criminal law codes, as well as detailed laws on property and commerce. Calvin's legal work wasn't just theoretical. He actively participated in the justice system, sitting as a judge in the Genevan consistory, a special court that dealt with moral and religious issues. The consistory would hear cases and decide on punishments which could range from simple warnings to excommunication, a serious penalty that meant being excluded from the church and community. Excommunication was a powerful tool in Calvin's system. If someone committed a serious sin or refused to repent, they could be excommunicated, which meant they couldn't participate in the sacraments or other church activities. This was a big deal in Geneva, where being part of the church was central to social life. Excommunicated individuals were often shunned by their friends and family, and they had to go through a process of repentance to be welcomed back. Despite the strict nature of the consistory, there were cases where the system showed flexibility. For example, Jacques Mérold, an Anabaptist who initially rejected infant baptism and criticized the early Protestant pastors, was eventually accepted into the community. After being taught by a local pastor, Mérold became a respected teacher and even gained citizenship in Geneva. This shows that the system wasn't just about punishment, but also about reform and inclusion. Calvin's approach to law and church was not without controversy. Some Protestant leaders, like Heinrich Bullinger in Zurich, disagreed with the use of excommunication, seeing it as an abuse of power. However, Calvin and his followers in Geneva believed that discipline was essential for maintaining a pure and righteous community. They saw it as a way to protect the church and ensure that its members lived according to God's laws. The balance between law and liberty was a key theme in Calvin's work. He believed that laws were necessary to deter sin and encourage good behavior. But he also recognized the importance of personal freedom. In his view, the church and state had to work together to create a society where people could live in harmony with God and each other. This legal and theological framework influenced many other Reformed communities, especially in Scotland and the Netherlands. These communities adopted similar laws and practices, emphasizing the importance of discipline in the church. In his Institutes and other writings, Calvin often discussed the role of the state in promoting justice and the role of the church in nurturing faith. He believed that both institutions were essential for creating a society that honored God and protected the well-being of its citizens. Calvin's legacy as a lawyer and reformer shows that he was not just a theologian, but a practical leader who understood the importance of law in shaping a community. His ideas continue to influence how many people think about the relationship between church and state and the role of law in promoting a just and moral society. John Calvin. The influential reformer didn't just write glowing tributes to the French king. He also used his legal skills to argue for the rights and freedoms of Protestants. He pointed out that many Protestants were being treated unfairly, facing false accusations, violence, and unjust imprisonment. He said that their cases were handled without proper legal procedures, and judges were biased against them. Calvin believed that these abuses went against the basic freedoms that were recognized in both the Empire and France. Calvin's arguments weren't just about protecting Protestants. In his book, The Institutes of the Christian Religion, he called for the freedom of all peaceable believers, including Catholics, Jews, and Muslims. He strongly opposed forced baptisms, inquisitions, and other forms of religious persecution. Calvin believed that people should be treated with kindness and mercy, and that religious faith should be a matter of personal choice, not coercion. For Calvin, freedom was a precious gift from God. He often quoted from the Bible, especially the letters of St. Paul, to support this idea. Phrases like, "For freedom Christ has set us free," Galatians chapter 5, verse 1, and "Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom," 2 Corinthians 3:17, were central to his teachings. Calvin saw freedom as more valuable than almost anything else, saying it was an inestimable good and more than half of life. Calvin also believed in the importance of political rights, such as the right to vote. He argued that a government where people can exercise their freedoms and participate in decision-making is the best kind of government. He warned that tyranny and the loss of liberty often happen when people misuse their right to vote. As Calvin continued to develop his ideas over the years, he began to speak more about individual rights. He talked about the common rights of mankind, natural rights, and the equal rights and liberties of all people. He discussed specific rights, like the right to property, the right to marry, and the right to speak freely. However, Calvin always emphasized that rights come with responsibilities. He believed that the purpose of having rights and freedoms is to enable people to serve God and their neighbors more effectively. For example, the right to property means that you should use your resources to help others, and the right to freedom means that you should use it to obey God's commandments. Calvin often used the Ten Commandments to explain natural rights and duties. The first set of commandments, duties to God, can be seen as rights to honor God, worship, and avoid false gods. The second set, duties to neighbors, can be seen as rights to life, property, and reputation. These rights and duties are not just for believers, but are part of human nature and should be respected by everyone. Calvin also developed a theory about the uses of God's law. He believed that God's law serves three main purposes. First, it helps to control the behavior of non-believers, who might otherwise act without any moral constraints. Second, it shows everyone their own sinfulness, leading them to seek God's grace. Third, it teaches believers how to live a holy and loving life, both in private and in public. For Calvin, the law provides a framework for both civil norms, rules everyone should follow, and spiritual norms, higher standards for believers. The state is responsible for enforcing civil norms, ensuring a basic level of order and justice. The Church, on the other hand, is responsible for teaching and encouraging the higher spiritual norms, helping believers to live a life that reflects their faith. Calvin saw the state and the Church as separate but complementary institutions, each with its own role in promoting a just and godly society. Political rulers, he believed, are appointed by God to be his representatives on earth, and they should exemplify virtues like integrity, mercy, and humility. Together, the state and the Church provide the external means through which God invites people into a relationship with Christ and keeps them in that relationship. Calvin believed that rulers should govern with written laws, not just by what they personally decide. These laws should be based on the principles of loving God and loving your neighbor, but they shouldn't be the exact laws from the Bible. Instead, the laws should be fair and adaptable to the needs of the community. Calvin thought that fairness was the most important goal of any law. He also believed that the structure of government should be self-limiting, meaning that rulers should have checks on their power. Monarchs, or kings, often lack self-control and don't always act justly. Calvin thought it was better to have a group of people like in an aristocracy, or even better, a mix of aristocracy and democracy, where the best and most moral people are chosen by the people to lead. To prevent tyranny, Calvin suggested several safeguards. Magistrates should govern through local agencies, follow written rules, and divide their power among different branches. They should also be elected and hold regular meetings to explain their actions and listen to the people. The purpose of government and law, according to Calvin, is to help God achieve a civil and just society. Magistrates are like protectors of public order, ensuring that people live in peace and respect each other. They should enforce laws that promote good behavior and punish those who break the law. Calvin believed that magistrates should enforce the principles of the Ten Commandments, both in how people relate to God and how they treat each other. For example, magistrates should make laws against blasphemy, heresy, and other offenses against religion. They should also make laws against crimes like murder, theft, and adultery. By enforcing these laws, magistrates help create a society where people can live peacefully and where the church can flourish. However, Calvin also set limits on the magistrates' power. They should not make their own laws about religion and worship. They should only enforce God's laws as interpreted by the church. Christians should resist magistrates who command them to do things that go against God's laws. Calvin believed that when rulers try to force people to do things that are against God, they lose their authority. Magistrates should protect the rights and liberties of their subjects. They should pass fair and consistent laws to ensure that no one's person or property is violated. Calvin argued that it's wrong for magistrates to abuse their power and betray the freedom of the people. Magistrates should also be fair in how they enforce the law. They should be gentle and understanding when dealing with people who are weak or ignorant, but firm with those who are stubborn and resist the law. Calvin believed that God has given the church its own distinct role. The church is responsible for preaching the gospel, administering the sacraments, teaching, and caring for the needy. The church should have its own structure with different roles for ministers, doctors, elders, and deacons. Each of these roles should be filled by people elected by the congregation, and they should be accountable to each other and to the congregation. The church has three forms of power: the power to teach and explain the faith, the power to make rules for its own organization, and the power to enforce discipline. The church's discipline should be spiritual, using methods like instruction and excommunication, not civil or criminal punishment. The church should always be moderate and fair, and its decisions should be made by a group, not just one person. One of the key institutions that Calvin created was the consistory. The consistory was a group of pastors and lay elders who met weekly to address both spiritual and civil issues. They dealt with a wide range of problems, from family disputes to moral issues. The consistory acted as a mediator, trying to resolve disputes amicably. If a case involved a serious crime, they would refer it to the city council for further action. The consistory was a unique blend of church and state authority. It played a crucial role in maintaining order and promoting a moral society in Calvin's Geneva. Calvin's legal expertise was often crucial in these meetings, and he often provided guidance and advice in complex cases. Through the consistory, Calvin aimed to ensure that both the spiritual and civil aspects of life were governed by God's principles, creating a society where people could live in peace and righteousness. John Calvin, the man who shaped much of the Protestant faith, left a lasting mark on the world, especially in how we think about law, religion, and society. His ideas, though rooted in the 16th century, continue to influence our modern world in many ways. Calvin believed strongly in the separation of church and state, even though his vision was quite different from what we understand today. He thought that both the church and the state had distinct roles given by God. The church was responsible for spiritual matters, like teaching the Bible and caring for the souls of people. The state, on the other hand, was to maintain order, protect people, and ensure that public worship was conducted properly. Calvin saw these two institutions as working together, but each with its own unique responsibilities. One of Calvin's most important contributions was his idea of Christian liberty. He believed that people should have freedom of conscience and the ability to practice their faith without fear. This idea later inspired many other religious leaders and thinkers, leading to the development of laws that protect religious freedom in many countries. Calvin also emphasized the importance of the rule of law and democracy within the church. He believed that the church should be governed by clear laws and that its leaders should be elected by the members. This helped to prevent corruption and ensure that the church remained true to its teachings. Calvin's ideas about democracy and the rule of law later influenced the development of modern democratic governments. Another key aspect of Calvin's thought was his recognition of human sinfulness. He believed that people are naturally inclined to misuse power, and that institutions like the church and state should have checks and balances to prevent abuse. This idea led to the development of constitutional protections, and the idea that power should be limited and shared. Calvin's teachings also emphasized the interdependence of religious and civil rights. He believed that protecting religious freedom required protecting other rights, like the right to speak freely, assemble, and worship. This idea was crucial in the development of human rights theories and the recognition that religious and civil rights are deeply connected. Finally, Calvin's views on creation and human nature influenced his understanding of human rights. He believed that people are created in God's image and have a duty to reflect God's glory and justice in the world. This idea led to the belief that people have natural rights and responsibilities, which are essential for a just society. In the end, John Calvin's ideas about law, religion, and society have had a profound impact on the Western world. His emphasis on freedom, democracy, and the rule of law, as well as his understanding of human nature and the need for checks on power, continue to shape our thinking and our institutions. While his world was very different from ours, his insights remain relevant and continue to inspire people to work for a more just and free society.